For your information, the CCR cookout plans are in the works. That we don't have final information on, but that will be in the newsletter and some other communications. But we're looking for a cookout time that'll be not interfering with other things. So keep your eye out for the cookout. I would say again, if any of you would like the VP position, it remains empty. We need help. And if you want to continue to do as many things as this club does, think about volunteering and helping the club. The programs are pretty well done for this year. We're working on next year, but consider volunteering and we'll help you. The exhibit director position is also available. We have exhibits set up for the rest of the year, and we need some help with that volunteering. And the board is willing to help. So if you know somebody that's willing to do that, please encourage them, and we'll try to be as helpful as we can from the board level. The F-22 exhibit is still up at the Richmond Public Library until the end of July. That's a group of photographers that got together and put up their own exhibit, but it's a nice exhibit at the Richmond Public Library. I don't know the answer to that. Is it middle of August? Oh, great, great. Library. Yep. Jay Denny is volunteered to help with the exhibits, but the director position is still empty, and Dan is willing to help show you the ropes if you know somebody that's willing to help with the exhibit position. From Pat, is this right? 65 images tonight, 30 panoramas, 35 general photographs. That's a pretty good turnout. We've had as many as 90 or 100 on occasion. So shake the bushes and keep getting people to volunteer. For those of you who do not know Nic Stover, he has a huge internet presence. And I think we are the only group for which he does evaluation. And that's really wonderful.
You guys are.
And I don't know how we got that standing, but
Karen has some good dirt on me.
That great.
She's threatened to blackmail me.
He grew up in Colorado, lived in Idaho for 10 years, now lives in Central California. Turned pro in 2020. Like I said, huge internet presence. With online courses, and CCR is the exclusive online review that he does not do anyone else, and that's great. So if he's online, or I don't know if you've seen him yet, Nick, welcome. Thank you very, very much for your help with our group and evaluation, and we look forward to many more times of this. So welcome again.
Well, I appreciate the intro as well. And I was half joking. Maybe I'm fully not joking. I'm not sure. Karen may have some blackmail material on me or something. But no, I'm actually happy to be back. Again, I have a couple soft spots for certain camera clubs in certain regions and areas that I've had great experiences with and good loyal followings and interactions with, and Richmond Camera Club CCR is definitely at the top of that list. So I'm happy to come in, and I'm happy to spend some time with you tonight to talk about some image evaluation and everything else. As mentioned a little bit in the intro, I do, it's kind of interesting because it says I have a commanding online presence or whatever. It's kind of funny because I'm not on social media at all in one iota, but I do run nature photography classes. And I do bring together speakers on a wide variety of topics to talk about things. And our next series was just announced on Sunday, and it's called Intentional Black and Whites. It's with Michael Gordon, Brooks Jensen, the publisher of Lenswork, Huibo Hu, amazing black and white photographer, and Richard Martin, will be speaking, and that starts on July 31st. So check those out. Those are on naturephotographyclasses.com. We have a whole bunch of speakers. I've had, I think 63 different speakers over the last few years, everyone from Guy Tall to Mark Adamus, topics from mostly nature and landscape photography focused. I have some upcoming ones on wildlife. I have one on projects. Some really good stuff going on there, which is really exciting. So check those out in there. So for tonight, I think I'm supposed to start with the as, which is the focus directly of the panorama theme. And then I do have some generals I'll be able to offer some comments on as well. Not 100% sure on the exact format in terms of the engagement or interaction. So I'm going to kind of roll with talking through the images and panoramas in general, and then feel free to stop me for questions or comments as I'm going through this. So what I want to start with is a little bit of a primer on, and I didn't ask, just confirming you can see my Lightroom pretty well. Can somebody give me a thing that you can see the images in Lightroom? Because Zoom seems to change on an hourly basis what they do and how they do it. So
yes, we can see.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so let's talk about a little bit of producing panoramas and what goes into them. So here's an example of an image, a very popular image of mine that sells pretty well at art fairs and everything else. This is oriented in a kind of a classic 2x3 orientation as it comes out of my camera. As I captured this image on the particular night, I wasn't thinking panorama. I wasn't thinking vertorama. I wasn't thinking anything other than really aligning the image together in such a way to lead you back towards the sun out there in the distance, kind of down this area, etc. But as I started to play around kind of more and more with this image and thinking about different ways, I started to discover, well, I could do it as a circle. So circle prints actually are selling increasingly better and better for me at art fairs. It's an interesting way to display my work. All of the print companies out there can print your work in a circle, and it fits in spaces that you can't get a traditional print in as well. So I know tonight's not about circles, but I just wanted to mention that because the secondary part of this becomes how I can display vertoramas or panoramas. So these are 1:3 ratio right here. So it's the same print. Like even if I add the print in there, you can see, and I've cropped one into a 1:3 that goes this way that could fit a particular scene or situation differently. I've also been able to crop this one as a vertorama that leads back into the distance as well. So we do have some images within our photography portfolio that maybe we didn't think within the field we wanted to capture them as a panorama, which I would consider more of a horizontal or a vertorama, the vertical kind, that we could go back later and kind of make some changes or modifications to there. So just something to think about with that. The second part of them in general would be, how do I think about traditional vertoramas or panoramas? And those are typically going to be a 1:2 ratio. So for every one image, 1 pixel or 1 inch or whatever we want to think about going vertically, we're going to be going 2 images horizontally. So this one, as we can see, when we look at the actual pixel dimensions or the size dimensions, completely is indicative of that kind of a ratio. So the common sizes for printing might be something like an 18:36 or a 12:24 or whatever else, but we're going to be thinking about a 1:2 ratio within those prints. I've started to do more and more of what I consider a 1:3 ratio print. So once again, for every 1 inch of vertical, we're going to have 3 inches of horizontal. So something like this wouldn't be a 12:24, it'd be something like a 12:36. And this one is an example of drone panoramas. I'm increasingly, when I do fly my drone, which is harder and harder to do based on legalities in certain areas, doing a 1:3 ratio. And the newer drones will set it up and it'll take the images for you. And then you just have to simply stitch them together at a later point in time. The older versions of the drones, you had to physically move it and try to overlap it and get it correct. Now you just set up your composition and you can go into the panoramic mode, and it'll take, in this case, 21 images for this particular scene, put them in a separate folder. So then when I download them, I have the 21 images there, and then I can go in and stitch and combine those kind of later into the image that makes sense. So something to consider and keep in mind on the drones these days, if you can do that, is you can do panoramas very easily within your images. And I'll show you a little bit of what that looks like. So here's another drone image here. So this one right here, this is in Greenland. It's in this valley. I'm all the way down, I think right here. Probably can't quite see me, but all the way down here by the creek or by the lake, excuse me. And I have the drone way up there in the air. So I've shot this one manually going from left to right within the valley, and I've created 6 images here. And as you can see, I'm trying to overlap within the image. So this first one here to this one here to this one here to here, and all the way to the end. And by overlapping within the images, I'm giving the program something to align the pixels. And so to create a panorama, all I do is right click, then I go to photo merge and I do panorama. And it's going to sense that I bracketed this image, but I don't want to do HDR because I didn't fully bracket it the way I want. But I'm going to put this in place. And it's going to create an HDR. I actually selected yes. So oops, mistake there. So let me try that again. So, so photo merge panorama, not HDR. And then I don't want to do an HDR. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a projection within Lightroom right now. And it'll usually do it fairly quickly for me. So even as I'm talking, it's going to quickly kind of put this together. Of course, it does it quickly earlier in the day, and now it wants to take a sweet time when you need to actually demonstrate something. Come on, really? Computer, what is going on here? There we go. Now it's moving along. So we'll kind of get there. All right. So the couple reasons I say this or show this really quick is there's going to be different projections over here. I've yet to ever find a perspective projection that I like. You can see it really distorts things. I've never found one there. Spherical and cylindrical are going to kind of vary a little bit. Some images you're not going to see much of a change at all. But what I do see with cylindrical is it will kind of stretch it just a hair more vertically within the image, which will make a big difference. So I oftentimes will do cylindrical, but don't hesitate to kind of cycle between those two things. You can do the auto settings, which will give you kind of a little bit more of a preview within the image of what it looks like. You can have it auto crop the image. I almost never will do auto crop. Sometimes I'll have it fill the edges for me. And you can get kind of a preview when you check that box. So what it's going to do is it's going to go in and fill some of these edges out there within the image. And maybe you're going to want to crop them later. Maybe you're going to want to make other changes. And that's completely up to you. But it'll give us a preview. And then the other option we have is the boundary warp. So if we do the boundary warp, you can see, well, now it's kind of taking the image and kind of pushing it back up just a little bit and filling in the corners. And now we have a panorama that probably doesn't need any more cropping or anything else. And so in this case, I wouldn't even mess with filling the edges. I certainly wouldn't want to crop because I don't want to lose this portion of it up here. So I would just probably fill the edges and then I would hit merge. So that's the two ways to think about or how to create the panoramas within there. A couple of the things I'll mention just really quick before we get into the images. One is you can do panoramas on your iPhone or smartphones. You can do both vertical and horizontal panoramas. So don't forget that if you're in a situation like a slot canyon or something else, you can do a vertorama with your phone. You just got to push the little button and tell which direction you want the arrow to go. Same thing on, you could be doing a panorama going from left to right, but you actually want to do it from right to left. You just hit the little arrow and it'll flip the direction all the way within there. So sometimes it's really better to do a panorama kind of mock test image before you spend all the time and the effort going into your images and create them later. So before I jump into the image evaluation, any questions on this part? All right, you guys you didn't come to see all that, but I think it was probably helpful for those of you that maybe didn't submit images or don't think you have panoramas because you've taken them or haven't taken them. The other thing I will mention is, let me see if I can even find one really quick. This one, so yeah, this one's a good example. So this is, I've already stitched this panorama together. Actually, no, you can see it. Some of the ones right here. If you're taking wide angle lens panoramas, they're going to distort things quite a bit within the images. So be really careful with your wide angle. I've definitely gone away from shooting wide angle lenses for panoramas. So this waterfall over here on the right-hand side was almost completely vertical. You can see with photographing with the wide angle lens, it's kind of at an angle. So that's one thing on if you're creating those in camera, be careful of creating wide angle panoramas. It's going to make things feel sometimes a little distorted. But I always will put my camera on the vertical kind of portrait axis to take the image across. So I'll try to rotate the camera, overlapping about 30% of the time as I go through the image. So, all right, well, let's take a look at what we have here. So I put these into the order of the file name. I don't think there's any right or wrong way to go through these. You can see we have 30 just absolutely magnificent images. I'm really glad to see one image come in as a Vertorama. It's an excellent selection. We'll talk about that as we go through. And in general, some of the images I'm going to talk about techniques that are going to apply to a wide variety of images. Other images, I'm going to talk about very specific things in there. So not every image I'll have a ton to say about, just kind of based on maybe things or techniques I've talked about, but I do want to spend some time with each of those. And then we have 35 general images. So some of these we're going to go through. A couple things I'll be able to demonstrate techniques or things to look out for. But let's just start right there. I did see one question come through. What are suggested camera settings, auto settings? That's a good question. So these are whenever I'm shooting panoramas, I'm not going to change my settings at all from shot to shot to shot. So as I'm shooting through there, I do not want to change anything. And that sometimes will lead you to not being able to be in auto. You're going to need to be in either something like aperture priority or ideally be fully in manual mode and not change anything all the way through. Same thing goes on your capturing the image in RAW versus JPEG. So if you're in JPEG, you're not going to be able to change your white balance later, which is going to oftentimes create you a problem. If you're going from a bright part to a dark part, your white balance, your auto white balance will potentially change. But you can set that all within Lightroom or Photoshop later. So just keeping that in mind. Okay, so let's start with this one. And some of them won't be able to do full screen.
Hey, Nick. This is Pat Hutchinson, digital director. I just wanted to let you know that what I'll do is read the title of the photo, and then you can review it. And then when you're finished, I'll read the photographer's name.
Oh, great. Thanks, Pat.
So this one is titled A River Runs Through It.
Yep. Okay. So a couple of things I really like about this image. One, the photographer did a good job kind of encapsulating the massiveness of the river. And I don't want to say, I used to know what river this is. I'm not an East Coast guy, so apologies for not knowing. But also shows the massiveness and how it kind of comes back around. There's a little bit of framing down here around the bottom here. I'm going to turn on this Cursor Pro thing, which will help a little bit as I'm pointing into the image. So I'll be able to do this thing down here. Oh no, I notice it's just cutting off a little bit of never mind, I have to stay in here. So this area right here, we put some framing around when the image, which is good. One concern I have is a little bit of the water back here looks pretty bright. It's not quite clipping, but it looks really, really bright back within the image. Oh, geez. Now it's jumping around on me. So something to consider on those particular scenes and situations might be kind of taking our highlights down a little bit, or even painting on a little bit back in here just to darken these down just a hair. So if we look over here, you can actually see some of the ripples there within the water. Back over here, it's all almost completely white water. And the reason I mention this is anything that is a pure white within an image is going to attract the eye much more than anything that has some of the subtlety or kind of some of the nuance within here. So this area of the image, well, it's not a pure white, so you can still see some of that detail within there, and you can kind of still get in there and see some of the ripples and see some of the textures that are kind of forming. So something to consider. One definite change I would make is it looks like we have 3 birds flying here. I would just clone those out. I don't need to have you focused up there and thinking, are those lens spots or what's going on, or do they forget it? Just keep you within the image. So.
That was by Billy Sinclair.
Monument Valley. All right, you want to read the title?
I'm sorry, this one is titled Arid Elegance.
Love the title. I tried to go through and look images when I looked at them to think about the titles a little bit, and I like that title in that regard. I like the treatment on this image, what makes this image really interesting to me. So I love Monument Valley as well. I went out there this last spring and got to go up to Hunts Mesa with a Navajo guide and watch sunrise and sunset up there, and it was just a really interesting experience. But I like about this image as well, whether it's through the post-processing technique or the time of day, is the variance in the tones. So the dark kind of aridness of the rock / sand / whatever else we're dealing with in this lower right quadrant gives it kind of some real density, so to speak. And then as we have everything else within there, so good tonal processing within there, it kind of makes it feel, you can still see the clouds. It doesn't feel completely washed out or anything else. And so nice job.
That was by Susan Van Manen.
Okay.
This one's titled Bathing Beauties.
Okay. So like the image, kind of fun. It almost could be like a composite or something else in terms of this, if it's 4 birds or 1 bird taken 4 times and put together, doesn't really matter. Couple comments. One is we have a fair amount of noise back here within the image. That's oftentimes just a pure subject of, and we can see ISO was relatively low, 1250. But this is something that you could clean up either with the effects. No, is it effects or is it lens correction? They keep adding things. Noise reduction. It's under detail now, and it's called denoise. And you can't do it on a JPEG. You'd have to do it on the DNG file or the RAW file. But Topaz is a really great add-in program. But I can also tell you that denoise within Lightroom is doing a really good job. So you clean up some of that image noise in the background, which would help the image just a little bit more. And then the other things I can say are See, I can't even operate Lightroom sometimes. Okay, so the other thing we have going on over here is when you hit the J key to turn things off and on to show clipping or non-clipping, is we have a fair amount of clipping going through. And why does that matter? Well, once again, going back to the technique of pure white, when you print or if you print or even in digital, that's going to show up with no detail whatsoever. So I'm thinking as you did the last portion of your processing, you could have pulled your highlights down a little bit in the processing portion and probably been able to save a little bit of that detail and not have the clipping. But if you didn't do that there, you can also just pull it back ever so slightly as you get into it. This over here is clipping in the back darks. Maybe it's a little bit of more detail than you want to show back there. I don't know. But if you wanted to fix that, you could just either take your blacks up or open your shadows a little bit more. Otherwise, good sense of scale, good sense of place, of having space around each bird within there.
That was by Carrie Gottlieb.
All right. Okay.
This is titled Bay Haven Sunset.
No, you don't have to apologize. I'm going to learn by the time we get to the 65th image to let you say your thing. So, all right, Bay Haven Sunset. So I have mixed feelings about the moon. One is I like it being up, it's kind of cool within the image. It adds a little bit of the kind of juxtaposition bounce between the bottom right and the top left. But I would think as a whole, the main focal area that I want you focusing in as the photographer is the viewer of the image is on the right-hand side of the image, probably even more so than the whole scene. So I would consider cropping down a little bit into an orientation, maybe even more similar to this, or even down potentially a little bit more. Because while the sky is somewhat interesting, the real life within this image is over here on the right. And I would say even less so than over here on the left. And so it has a potential to be a pretty aggressive crop to get to something like this. But now I'm showing the interesting of the dock. People want to envision being able to be out on a dock, out there actually watching that sunset all the way through there. And now you're bringing more of the tone into the image as well, and more of the focus into this beautiful color area. So just food for thought.
That was by Michael Orr.
Michael.
This is
okay.
This is
I'm gonna learn.
This is titled Churchill View.
Great. Okay, so Churchill View, interesting. The only thought I had on this one was, where do we want to focus and how do we want to see within the image? And it feels like the majority of the focus is going to be in the kind of the city park area, not as much over to the right. So I felt a little bit like, if my eye was wandering a little further towards the right side of the image, over towards the trees and over here, versus kind of focused in on, cool, interesting things like the old water tower, the stack over here, and kind of everything that's over here. So I would think in a similar way of cropping in on the right-hand side. And so we lose a little bit of that detail over there, kind of in on this particular side within the image. Obviously, at that juncture, it doesn't really fit the full panoramic. So we're 1122 by 3850. So we actually could crop in on the right and still kind of have a panoramic focus. But I would just think about what the subject is within the image and how you want to showcase that.
That was by Bill Whitworth. This is Dover Hall Estate.
See, I remembered that time. All right. I'm going to forget next time, but I remember this time. I like this image. I'm not sure where Dover Hall is, so I don't have a personal connection to it, but I liked the image. Very unique kind of scene and situation. The one thing I found myself, and maybe this is in the capture at a later point in time, is I'd want a little bit more grass on the left. It's very thin, kind of stripped, and it feels kind of compressed for me within the viewer. So if you have in your raw capture a little bit more of the grass, you wanted to maintain the same ratio, that's fine. But I would try to add maybe that proportional amount that's on the top into the bottom portion and have this thing feel a little less compressed on the bottom left. I wouldn't necessarily worry too much about cropping in. If we crop in, as an example, on the right, well, that doesn't feel right with only half the tree there. So you left a good amount of space on the right side of the image. The other thing I noticed is it looks like this is a little bit out of focus. And I don't know if that's just either how it was sharpened or captured, if there was some wind or something else, or if it's just the way it looks. When I zoom in, it doesn't, but when I'm zoomed out, it kind of does. The other thing to consider on something like this is, do you want to mess around or play around with your sky at all? And so the AI feature, I'm not a huge AI fan, but I do like how it's improved our capability to target specific things. So you can go into Lightroom, you could do the adjustment, have it target just the sky for the mask, and then maybe you want to pull down the highlights a little bit, pull down your blacks a little. I don't want to mess with our whites on this one. Pull down our shadows, pull down the exposure. And this is on a JPEG, so it's not going to look as good. But now, if we look at a before and an after, well, you have a little bit of detail up there within the sky versus it feeling completely white. So it just depends a little bit on mood. But I always, if I have cloud detail like you have, I sometimes will go in and take a closer look at it.
That was by Ling Whitworth.
Perfect.
This is
All right.
Frosty Tetons.
See, I told you I'd forget the next time. I'll try to remember to take it. All right, Frosty Tetons. Moraine Lake, Moran, not Moraine. That's where I'm going in Canada next. Moran, Moran, Moran. I can't talk today. Jeez. Brain's a little dead from the art fair this last weekend. Okay. So, as we look at this image, we have a little bit on the borderline of too bright on the snow itself. It's really hard to be able to encapsulate that and then keep all the crispness of the blue sky as well. So I would consider some tone curve adjustments, kind of coming into that the dark kind of middle turn, and I'm pushing the brights towards the darks a little bit more. So if you watch, the darks are moving down. I potentially move the shadows down a little bit, moving the highlights down, moving the lights down a little bit within the image. And so once again, looking at a before and an after, well, now we can see a little bit more of the details and the contrast and tonality within the peaks and within the reflection. So I didn't make a big adjustment to the histogram. I just simply, so if we watch the histogram up here, it goes from over on the right side a little bit more to more into the middle. So I'm pushing a little bit more the tonality and the midtones within the image. So just food for thought to consider. Otherwise, I love the image. Good job here on the bottom, kind of keeping that space. We always want to see in anything we have symmetry or reflection. We want to see space around the reflection for our eye to kind of move through and compare up on the top portion.
That was by Cindy Walker. This is titled Gaudi's Sagrada Familia.
This was our lone Vertorama, and what an excellent choice for a Vertorama it was. Really well done, really well executed. I went back and forth on, do we keep the people or do we not keep the people? And it's a personal choice, artistic choice on whether to do that or not. It definitely puts some scale into the image to be able to show that. But great job on the symmetry. So if we look at how things are symmetrically lining up all the way through the framing, the cropping, really encapsulates it really well. Good processing as well. So you can look into the image as a whole and you can see a lot of the detail that's up there without it feeling too dark. Oftentimes within an enclosed situation, you'll see a little bit of things that are with the blacks are very dark within an image, and we're not seeing that here. We're not seeing much clipping, and where we are seeing clipping up here is okay. And I think it actually could just be from what I was doing. So just the teeniest amounts of clipping, which is totally appropriate. The teeniest amounts of light banding over here on the right-hand side where it's clipping the brights, which you just simply can't avoid. But if you had massive amounts of this image that were blown out or too dark, it would feel really encompassing. So having areas that are really well balanced brings the image together.
That was by Terry Troxel. This is titled Hilltop Serenity.
Definitely so. This would be an interesting image for me to try to sell. Not this one in particular. Don't worry, I don't steal clients' images because it evokes a strong feeling. And so this is one to pause. You know, a lot of our images are going to show some of the mastery or some of the brilliance, like the previous image of the Gaudi Cathedral. This one is going to evoke something within most people. Taking a nap underneath a tree, lying out within an area as a child and watching the clouds go by, or even as an adult. What's on the other side of that hill is going to evoke oftentimes. So a lot of good stuff within there. There's an opportunity to do a little bit of cleanup on this image. So we have some sensor dust over here, some sensor dust there. I think I found another one up here. Those are simple ones to just clean up and go through because you don't want to detract away from the beauty of the image. Same thing as well. You could possibly play around a little bit with your highlights and kind of bringing those down to get a little more cloud detail within the image. But as a whole, really strong and well presented.
That was by Bruce Yoder. This is Lake in the Dolomites.
That's great. I was supposed to go to the Dolomites. Never mind, I won't digress. But not going to make it this year, but I'm going to go to France instead. I'm excited. So minor things over here. We're getting that little bit of clipping over on the right-hand side. The other thing that I look at within this image is it looks like either we're kind of pushing towards the HDR or we really opened up those shadows quite a bit. So what I'm seeing is a little bit of these kind of banding issues and these other things. We're pushing clarity in the dehaze just ever so slightly. This image as a whole, the lake and how strong it is and the beauty of the mountains, could kind of consider reprocessing it as well a second time. And then as you're doing that, focusing on opening up, well, sometimes I have to take a look at the image, but just by pulling back down our midtones and introducing a little more dark into the image, it's going to bring out a little bit more of the color within the lake. It's going to kind of show more of the drama and the details up there within the clouds as a consideration. This over here doesn't bother me. So if we turn the J key off or on, this being pure black, there's really nothing we can do. So I'm not worried by that kind of clipping. Adjusting the highlights, we got rid of that clipping that's up here. But I like the image. It's also interesting when we think about this one of what is added by the lake going all the way around versus like this. You can kind of make a decision. There's unfortunately not mountains balancing over there, but then by not keeping the lake going fully around, maybe it doesn't really help within the image. If you have other images within the series, and I don't know what's to the left of you as you were standing here, but sometimes, maybe there's a lake outlet that you could use as a leading line to kind of pull you in or something else, or you have another image standing further to the left. Well, that would rebalance the image a little bit like that. So if you had something further to the left in the series, that could possibly help with a little bit of the balancing, but as a whole, nice scene.
That was by Venkat Santosh.
Right.
This is entitled Lone Bison.
The Lonely Bison. Okay. So good job with capturing the lonely bison out there within there. This is one where we could benefit from doing a quick targeted adjustment just on the subject. And we'll see if it does it. And yes, Lightroom, even on a JPEG, was able to pick the bison out within the field. And it's going to be not as great on a JPEG, but what we're going to want to do on the unprocessed version is you should be able to open up the shadows a little bit and not have the bison completely be all black out there within the image. Does it make or break the image? No. But you could also have the image as a whole. We bring the bison up, you could see possibly a little bit of that detail of the hair, a little bit of the detail of the tonality within the bison and not take away from everything else. The other thing I would suggest in photographing a scene like this is to wait a little bit longer for the bison to move out of the center of the screen of the image. I'm not a big rule follower. I don't need to follow the rules of thirds or advocate people to follow the rules of thirds. But most of the time in wildlife images, I'm going to look to adhere to some element within there of having it intersect along a line like that, because it makes the image feel a little more balanced and it gives it oftentimes a little bit more of a sense of movement. When you can be in a situation like this one, it feels a little more expansive and you get lost. But as I've played around a lot with my images over the years, if I can be close to having some element of an intersecting line, it's going to help to give the wildlife within the image some movement.
That was by Ed Hageman. This one is Lord Delaware at Dusk.
Okay. So this one, I would commend the intent behind it and what it's communicating. But what I think we have going on here is our ISO is just too high. So ISO 12,800 at 1/60 of a second f11. So if this is a situation you can go back out and photograph again, I would be on a tripod and I would dramatically reduce my ISO. So anytime I can keep my ISO below 800, I'm going to be much happier with my image quality, because what I think is going on here is the ISO is so high, we've lost any and all detail down within here, and it feels very muddled down within the image. And we just have too much noise to kind of protect what's out there within there. So this is a great, what I would consider, and I have thousands of these types of images, of a great learning experience and kind of going back out again and trying again. And that would be to really shoot that ISO much, much lower, be on a tripod, maybe, you know, then you'd have a much longer exposure, but you'd be able to get that detail out within the image.
That was by Rebecca Perry. This is migration.
All right. What's not to love about this image? Only thing I'm seeing is I'm seeing some banding over on the left around the hot air balloon. And I don't know if it was as a natural part of the image or not. But what I would say is if you inserted it later, that's totally fine. If it was part of the image as it was taken within there, you're opening up, you're either, I can't tell for certain, but you're opening up your shadows too much, or your highlights, and you can see the haloing around the balloon. So I would focus less around what you want that to look like, and just be watching that as you're making any sort of adjustments within there. The S serpentine of the migration of the herds is absolutely fantastic. It also has an element of coming together on the left and the right portion, which is really unique. Great cropping, excellent cropping. You know, I mentioned earlier about the rule of thirds and how we want to balance an image. This one being right in the center of the image doesn't bother me for a second. Absolutely fantastic. You can see even within the sky, it's not equally proportional, but we have about 2/3 land, about 1/3 or so sky. Works really, really well.
That was by Harold Lana. This is Misty Morning on the Nile.
All right, do we have some more hot air balloons coming in? So if we look at these hot air balloons, we don't have that banding that was going on in that one particular one there. So there's a little bit more protection of, we got a little bit of over cleaning there, but that's fine. We don't have the same element of the importing or bringing things in to be able to, not importing, the same element of adjusting the background and the foreground so much, and so you don't have the banding issues going on. I would also probably crop out, just clone out the birds up here. Looks like it could be dot spots. The subject on the bottom left is great. It's an anchoring point for the whole rest of the image. Definitely encapsulates that morning light within the scene and the situation. A lot of interesting stuff going on here. I like the water as well. Feels very welcoming within the morning scenes. And so a nice scene.
That was by Ann Fulcher. This is Monumental Presidential Reflection.
So the first time I looked at this image, I was not sure what or where or what I'm looking at, which is kind of interesting on a lot of different parts and pieces. I like the subject choice to keep a person within the image of obviously the reflections on the other part and piece. I would crop down on this image and have it just keep some space around the top part, but the sky as a whole is giving me too much space to wander out within the image. So if we crop it down, well, now we're fixated down within the image on just the particular faces and looking at the faces within there. So my thoughts on that one.
That was by Marianne Barnhart. This is Mother Nature's Fury.
Yes, like this image. Good. I don't have the technical details on this one, which is totally fine. So I don't know what the ISO or was captured at, or I don't know what the shutter speed was. That all looks just fine from my perspective. Good job leaving some space on the pier. One thing I would consider on this image is if I flip it, how does it read going from left to right versus from right to left? So sometimes as we flip our images, they're going to read differently in terms of the movement and everything else that's in place. Besides that, the sign is interesting within there, and it kind of gives some context. I like what's going on there. I can see a couple spots. This is one right here where some dust or some sensor stuff. We have some dust along the top portions of the line of the image. Just take some time to clean those out, and you have a nice image.
That was by Ted Jerkuta. This is overlook at Harder Plume.
Yep. So, okay. I'm looking at the technicals on this one. So there's a little bit of a conflict for me between the people on the right and the mountains on the left. I'm not sure where I want to be focusing. And also with so much sky that's up within the image, it can kind of wander. I'm really struggling to find the subject and where I should be looking at. Also within the mountains as a whole, I don't think we got our focus completely right on them. They feel a little bit more muddled than I'd want to see. I'd want to see much crisper mountains out there within there. Also seeing a fair amount of noise within the shadows of this image. And so if it's taken as a JPEG and this is pretty much what we see is what we get, then that's fine. If you did capture it as a RAW, I would go back and restart some process. I would also really consider what do we want to show? And similar theme, by taking out a lot of that sky, how does that take the image? Well, now there's less to wander around, and maybe now I can kind of go between the people on the viewing platform out into the area. It also might be an image that just gets cropped a little bit differently. Don't have the people within there. Now you're focused on the village or the city that's down below in the mountains themselves. So I don't know what the artistic intent is. I would just focus on one thing at a time and what you potentially want it to be.
That was by Wiley Van Veer. This is Palouse Panoramic.
Like the Palouse, like the images here. I like the scale. Good job keeping in the trucks and the combine and everything else. I think we can work on the midtones of this image and kind of get even a little more of those details out. So I would go into your tone curve and I would play around with your lights and your darks. Just bringing your lights and your darks down. Play around with your shadows a little bit as well. And this is on a process one, but now if we look at our before and our after, well, now you have some of the delineation. You can see some of those rolling hills and some of the lines and some of the harvesting things just a little bit differently. The Palouse also is notorious for being able to play around with a wide variety of different crops and different images. I don't know if I would change this crop. The trees up here are kind of a good thing. If you play around too much with the cropping, you're going to start to see harder transition areas that you're going to lose some of that depth within the image. So if we look at a crop like this of cropping those trees out, well, now we've lost some of those depth cues to kind of show the massiveness. So tread carefully in terms of cropping.
That was by Carol Hageman. This is Queen of the Bay Breezes.
I like it, like the theme. Okay, so this one we can see, and I'm not sure what was used to stitch the pano, but they did not align. So we can see there's the breaks on the panos here, the breaks on the panos over here. So I would retry in whatever program you use to get those stitchings to line up. If you can't, and we sometimes have these within images, you're going to want to go into Photoshop and you're going to want to spot heal on these particular lines, and you can get things to kind of go away. This rock is going to be a big issue. You might have to end up cropping the right side of the rock, that rock out, which I probably would do anyways. It doesn't add as much as maybe even something like that. Now we have the focus on the dog. Now we have the focus on the flowers themselves.
That was by John Schickler. This is Salt Mountains.
Fun, interesting image. Couple things on this one. One is the monochromatic aspect of it leads me to believe it could also do well as a black and white. And so my black and white process is I just go into the profile browser over here with the 4 things, and I click through and highlight a little bit within there to get a sense of different treatments, what's going to happen and what's going to occur. So maybe a black and white 7 is going to read the image just right out of the gates differently. And now we can start to play around a little bit with the highlights, the whites. They're not getting a lot of adjustment, the blacks a little bit. Now we're getting a big, big difference between the clouds and the actual conical salt mountain pyramids. We're showing the tone even more within the image. This becomes a really compelling image. If we didn't go to black and white, which I'm not saying it's the right answer or wrong answer, it's just creative choices, I definitely would look at our midtones. So if we look at our histogram, we have a lot of our detail pushing the very, very bright edges. And so once again, tone curving it down, pulling some detail back into the midtones is going to potentially make the image a little bit stronger. It's going to show more of the cloud detail, some of the variations. So if we look at this image now we can see some of the kind of lines and crevasses a little stronger within the image, but like this image a lot.
That was by Paul Bickford. This is Seaside Serenity.
Capsulating a lot within the image. I want to see, what do I want to see within this image? So we have the seagrass over on the left. It's kind of pointing over towards here. It feels a little long, and I think that's probably going to be the case. So 894 by 3840. Yeah, we're a 1-to-4 ratio here. And it's no right or wrong on a 1-to-4. I've never printed a 1-to-4 and been happy with it, purely because it really, you lose so much of what makes the image potentially compelling to begin with. And so the reason I say that is you can't see, even on a large monitor screen, that lighthouse that's out there within the distance. And you can't necessarily even see some of the other elements within there. So if we crop it back down into, and then we have this detail over here on the right, which doesn't add to the image as well. But if we crop it down into something similar to closer to that, we still have some of those grasses. We still have some of the seaside here. We still have the clouds as well. Just something to consider. So
That was Karen Davis. Setting up the shot.
always nice as a photographer to have other people taking pictures of us as a photographer, because all too often we don't take pictures of ourselves out there within the landscape. The thought I had on this one was it's an interesting panorama because of the sky and the way the sky kind of, we have the really interesting texture lines up there within there. So we kind of like wave almost coming up within there. So what I'm talking about is the lines that are up here. The thing I was considering on this one is it almost potentially, it's not really a vertorama, but it almost potentially reads better in a more vertical orientation within there. And I don't want to take anything away from the panorama concept, but we're still encapsulating, we're still showing the rocks, and we're still getting what's of the most interest within this image if we were to crop it into a more of a vertical type of format. So just something to consider.
That was Parks Roundtree. This is Spruce Knob Sunset.
Lovely image. Not much I would say about this image. Only thing to sometimes consider is atmospheric depth. So selectively looking at our blues out there within the distance, this image kind of has, and we can see it a little bit in the histogram, a fair amount of blue tone, kind of blue hue out there within there. So one thing I would consider on this image is not going in and desaturating the image because we want the vibrancy and the color, a little bit of that sunset color as well. But I would probably go into the color mixer and I would go into the saturation and I would hit the little arrow here on the left for the selector, and I would go in and select just the blues and pull out, maybe not that much blue and purple, but pull out a little bit of that blue out there within the distance to kind of bring some of that things, because some of that mist and the fog out there in the distance. And the reason I would do that is because it'll help us to show the depth cues, and it'll help also with color separation. And it's going to be really too subtle probably to show through Zoom and on my computer. But with some of that blue pulled out, you can see the color separating just a little bit more.
That was by Kurt Engelman. This is Taking a Break.
Storytelling element for sure going on within this image. We have some banding going on up here with the sky, and we also have a little bit of that haloing going on within the trees. It looks like it's been HDR'd, and I would think that for an image like this, when we want to be about the actual taking of the break, we wouldn't want to do that as much as we want to focus on the scene. So I personally would reprocess this image non-HDR because I don't want any sort of the blue artifacting up there within the clouds. I don't need the trees to feel super open or anything else. I want it to be just on the scene itself. And as a whole, I would want it to be a little darker. And one way to darken it up a little bit is just to take down the mid-tone portion of our tone curve to kind of darken it up a little bit. It feels a little bit too bright for me, just personal preference.
That was by Jerry Posano. The Battlefield at Gaines Mill. Great
Orientation of the leading lines and kind of telling me where you want me to go. Love that. Absolutely loved it. I like the treatment of the image. I typically would, not want bright clouds like that at the top portion. I mean, they're clipping out up in some of the parts, but the whole scene kind of works. The whole idea for me is it feels otherworldly. It feels kind of like a different point in time. And so for me to have really bright clouds doesn't bother me within there. The other thing that's happening with the orientation on this image, which is why it's effective, is you can start to mentally follow the path or the trail all the way back across to the farmstead and what's over here within the distance. And that works quite well for me. You don't need to have it leading directly there. The eye will make that direct correlation. And then you can start a little bit of that wondering and wandering of the fascination that's back there. Only possible thing, and I know we've talked about this a lot, is I could potentially crop in a little bit at the left. Doesn't necessarily, but this looks, it kind of goes the opposite direction. So I possibly would crop in just a little bit on the left for something similar to that. But nicely done.
That was by Patricia Munford.
Oh, Patricia. I know Patricia. All right.
This is the Great Falls.
See, I've been doing a good job letting you introduce for the most part. So I am teachable. All right. I struggle a little bit with where to look and how to look. And it's hard in a scene like this to figure out what the right orientation is or what the right flow is. The issue is, as I'm following the movement from right to left, I'm going out of the image. And that's not oftentimes what I'm wanting to kind of encapsulate or bring forward within my images. I don't want you to just take a part of the image and just completely exit out of it within there. So within this image, kind of similar to one of the ones we talked about earlier, my focal point of interest is over here. This area is of the most interest to me within the image. We have the details. We have some of the texture lines leading us into some of the variations, different parts. This brings out a lot of depth. The other part of this image doesn't have a lot of depth over here. The depth and the dimensionality is on the right side of the image. So that's what I would probably be doing or thinking about if I was composing this scene, is really focusing in on that portion of it, not on the left-hand side.
That was by Heidi Nunnally. Sights of DC.
Timeless. Yeah, definitely timeless. And this is a perfect example of capturing a scene. Oh, this has been photographed 1,000 times before, 1,000,000 times before. There's nothing unique about this scene, blah, blah, blah. I don't care. Timeless. It's something we all should witness and see as photographers. And so I've had people say, well, I'm not going to go to Yosemite because it's all been photographed before. And I say, A, it's not all been photographed before, and B, you still need to see it. You still need to capture, still need to go out there and do it. So well done. I love the clouds. Good time of day. This scene. Only thing I'm seeing is some haloing around the monument on the left-hand side. So I would just, whatever local adjustments you made, I would just kind of dial those back a little bit so you don't have the haloing. You can still have it appear a little brighter without that haloing going on. It could be a combination of too much highlights and shadows. It could be just some of that local adjustments, but I would make those.
That was by Tony Johnson. This is Thirsty for Survival.
So this one is a 6-to-1 ratio, if we're looking correctly almost. So extremely wide panorama. And yet this one works really effectively for me. It's really difficult to find the right break within here to crop or stop the crop, so to speak. So I don't think there is, maybe you could crop in just a little bit more on this one on the right, but the where you stop this crop on the left is really good. If I had to or wanted to print this a little bit smaller, there's a teeny tiny break right here that you could potentially do. And the reason, so you almost could split this into if you needed to. And the reason I say that is sometimes images like this one are really difficult to display on our website. If I had to pick a side, I'd pick the left side. And you could just simply either have the tail there, or you could probably even just lightly Photoshop that tail portion out. Well, now you can actually see the warthogs. Now you can actually see, still see the mountains. You got some of the element of the water buffalo looking at you directly here. That's a compelling thing. The other thing, so let's take a look at it on the other side. And then the other side would be over here. So if we cropped it onto that side and then kept this side, what does this look like? What does this read? And it's not as strong on the right-hand side. The eye contact with the missing horn, which is interesting, isn't as strong out of this one. There's not as much compelling things within there. So I would consider, let me reset this one back to where I was. I would consider, actually, you could do it both ways, but I would consider cropping in more on the right-hand side or left-hand side to keep that compelling thing within there. But I like the image. Really interesting.
That was by Martin Evans. Too hot to play.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so what are we? I went back and forth on this image, and it's like, do I like it? Do I not like it? Do I love it? Do I hate it? What are we trying to communicate? What's going on here? And ultimately, I decided I didn't know. And that's totally fine. So we're showing the restaurant or place on the left-hand side, but we're also showing the water and how do the two relate, and the concept of the title kind of shows a little bit of that, of like too hot to play because there's not anybody that's actually in the water or whatever else. And how would I suggest cropping this one differently or whatever else? And the answer was I didn't have an answer for what potential changes or modifications I would make to the image. It encapsulates a scene that I don't see on a regular basis of that kind of lake scene and whatever else. So I don't know if I had a ton to add on this image other than technically well processed. I like the colorful umbrellas that are within there and everything else that's happening.
That was by Linda Schmiel. And this is VMFA.
Okay. So this one, as I look through it, I just kind of clean up a couple of these things. You can see there's, I think it's an airplane up there. And I'm looking at, for ISO 200, I wouldn't expect to see the noise I'm seeing. Okay, so let's look at this one objectively in a couple areas. One is, I'm not sure what the right side brings to this image. I don't think it actually helps what's going on. And so similar to some of the others, I would crop kind of in. And now we have a different scene or situation here. The framing of the sidewalk kind of mirrors the road that's down here, which kind of mirrors the angular lines, which kind of works in that regard. I also would look carefully at this image because we definitely have some clipping going on here, which we won't be able to save now, but we could in the raw. Because I don't want this really bright. I'd still want to see, we could see a little bit even by taking the highlights down, the cracks within the tiles and everything else. And so definitely taking the highlights down would rebalance that one out a little bit.
That was by Dave Johnson, and that's the last assigned subject.
All right. Well, should we take any questions or comments before we jump over into the other ones?
What's your feeling about when you do a panorama and you end up with an obvious artificial curve like a straight sidewalk, but because of the motion of the camera, you end up, seeing it curved, or, a straight road, it's obviously curved.
Yeah. That's why I don't do wide angle panoramas anymore. It's because it makes those curves even more unbalanced. But I'll give you an example. Well, I don't need to give you an example. I can tell you. I just stitched a pano together yesterday that I'd taken with a drone a number of years ago. And I didn't, even the way the program stitched, I had some distortion going on along the horizon. And so I grabbed what I'll do there is I'll drag the ruler down within Photoshop and put a straight line across. And then I'll go in and slightly warp the image to get it to try to line up as best I can within there. So if I have a particular thing I don't like the look of, it doesn't look natural, I will warp it in Photoshop to get it to kind of look more natural within the image.
Let me give you another example. Are you familiar with Big Basin redwoods? Mm-hmm. Okay, so they had this terrible fire, and it's just stunning to go in there. And I was taking multiple shots. You can't stand way back. You're taking multiple shots and trying to stitch them together vertically, and the trees start leaning in. And then I try to straighten them out, and then it clips out the photo, so I can't get them straight. I guess my solution would be, if I ever get out there again, take a wider photo, so that if I have to straighten it, whatever's left is still, I still have the trees left as I want them. But how do you handle it? Or is this part of your wide angle situation? Because I didn't use a particularly wide angle on this.
Yeah. So I have a plethora of just absolutely garbage trees images, and redwoods and sequoias are at the top of my list to be able to get them encapsulated because of that exact issue. What I've resulted to, or what I'm going towards, is finding images as far away as I can and taking them with as long of a focal length as I can get away with. So if I can find a sequoia that's quite a ways away in the distance and be able to photograph that with a much higher focal length, 100 millimeters or even more, I'm going to get a better image compression, and I'm going to have to overshoot the image and then combine things later to be able to do that. Because the wide angles, the distortion of it becomes just non-realistic, and also just doesn't encapsulate the beauty of it. So the best I've been able to do is to photograph with the telephoto and get the image compression to kind of bring it together.
What about the tilt lenses?
I've never used a tilt shift. I know some people that have had good success with those. I've never used one to be able to comment.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Other questions before we do a run through the last little bit?
Did you hear that?
I
His
didn't.
question, yeah, Dave's question was, what's the minimum focal length you would use to take a pano?
Trying to think recently. I've been shooting. I used to be able to shoot. I would used to shoot 14 mil. Well, there's two things to it. One is I will no longer, if I have my wide angle lens on, which is a 14 to 24, I will not shoot a panorama. I will not shoot a landscape oriented shot at all. I can't get them to look right. But if all I have on or I want it is a wide angle, I'll rotate the camera into portrait mode and then I'll shoot the panorama to be able to stitch that together. And I would say the minimum would be 24 millimeter. And I don't want to go wider than that if I can avoid it. But then if I do a 24 and I'm rotating the image with the camera in portrait mode, I can stitch some images together that look okay.
Aren't there two factors, so your lens and also the distance of the landscape? I mean, if the landscape is further away, you should be able to use a wider angle lens.
Yeah, but then you're gonna get the here, let me try to show you. I think it's in here. So of course I don't save my stitched images, but I'll just show you. All right, let me share this again. And why Lightroom now? Why Zoom will no longer just show? I have to click 7 windows to show Lightroom. All right, so here's a panorama. This one's from Norway, and this was taken with my wide angle. And this one you can see is 14 millimeter. So I took this one at full wide angle. I'm on a dock. And I want to encapsulate the right-hand side of the water that's within there. So this one, and this isn't, now you can critique my images. Well, you got your dust spots up there and your highlights are blown out, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, this is just my raw capture before I did much post-processing. But what I'm encapsulating, what I was working with the wide angle here was a little bit of that curvature of the dock. The dock itself was actually straight within the image. But there was curvature within the rocks themselves over on the right-hand side. Sorry, it jumped around on me. I'll bring it back. Oh, come on. Where'd you go? Sorry, I lost it. Here it is. So there's actually a little bit of curvature on the right-hand side, and I've gotten those two kind of mirroring within there. I didn't warp this image. This is just straight out of camera in Lightroom. But I'm working vertically, 3 images vertically. And also I have big mountains here. These are massive mountains in the fjords of Greenland. So that helps when I'm shooting wide angle to be able to pull it together. So that's an example of actually, I would say, semi pulling off a wide angle capture. Does that help?
I think that's it.
Okay. All right, we'll do the last of the review. I'm going to go a little faster on this one, so maybe not, and then take some questions at the end. So, sound good?
Yep.
All right. So we're in file name order.
Yep. This is titled A Mother's Love.
Tender moment. I also would say entitled this one A Dog's Patient Waiting, but that's either here nor there. Just like, come on, mom, drop it. Just drop it all the way down. I don't think I would change much about this image. You don't have either one of them looking at the camera, which is good. It encapsulates a moment. It's well balanced all the way through there. So well done.
That was Bruce Yoder. Beyond the Ice Wall.
Well, this one could have been in our panoramas for certain. Great job balancing the the glacier on both sides. I think this is Petito Moreno or one of the glaciers in Patagonia. I'm not sure. I like what I'm dealing with. I like what I'm seeing, the detail within there. Probably as I look at this image, going back to camera, there's some brightness within here that if you captured it in RAW, I would just make sure to tone that back ever so slightly because you're losing a little bit of that detail. But it feels encompassing and you can see some of the scale and massiveness within the image.
That was Martin Evans. This is Blackwater Falls.
Like it. The things I like about it are, I don't know if we have the actual data. We don't have the data, but I want to commend whoever took this image on getting a good exposure time. The waterfalls are looking borderline cotton candy down here, which is okay. But here we still have the rivulets kind of streaming down within there. Couple things I would say on this image, kind of similar to the example I showed earlier. You could crop this one in a lot of different ways and still show some of the coolness within the image. There's a lot of dead space on the right, and you could crop down a fair amount and still show without sky. Now I'm pulling you more into the waterfall itself. And kind of still showing some of the colors that are within there, etc. So something to consider and keep in mind is you could crop that one a lot of different ways. But I would probably want to do something with all that space on the right-hand side because it takes away from the beauty you did in capturing this and the beauty you did in capturing kind of some of the things leading back up to within there.
That was by Kurt Engelman. Botanical Falls. Oops, Botanical Canal.
Similar theme to what we dealt with before. The white sky up here is very distracting, and I don't think it adds a lot. Don't need as much grass on the left-hand side either to kind of bring forth the scene. So I would crop the top and I would crop the bottom left, and now you're giving the boat kind of a place to travel into. Almost a little bit of framing or whatever else. If you took some other images within the sequence or, maybe want to in the future, I would probably have waited till the boat just got a little bit further forward. So you could see the full arch itself and the boat kind of moving underneath there. And sometimes that's just a matter of timing, but usually I'll think a little bit about the subject and what it potentially is moving through before I would encapsulate or take the picture.
That was by Dave Johnson. Chapel Falls.
So this is the example of zooming more into the actual image itself. Good job on the exposure time. I could say probably I would go a little faster. I think you're at 30 seconds here. Go a little faster. We're getting a little bit of that cotton candy type of look. Anytime I'm photographing waterfalls or water in particular, I'm always bracketing and not for HDR or anything else. The pure reason I bracket is because I don't know completely where I'm going to want to be on my exposure time. And I may want to see something different. I'm going to start at 1/6 of a second and go slower from there, usually when I'm photographing waterfalls, because I want to protect and keep those rivulets in place of the water and not have it feel kind of washed out. I'm not saying that's completely the case here. The other issue we have in the longer exposures is we start to see it around the image is the movement from the trees and the water on the wind itself. The shorter exposure we can do, the better. The technique I will use oftentimes, so you can see right here is one, is I'll take an image that I think I have my exposure right for the water, and then I'll take another image at a much shorter exposure for the trees, and then I can blend the two images together with one that's sharp without water movement with one that has the actual water movement itself.
That was by Paul Bickford. Climbing the Dunes.
Wouldn't want to be out there today, tell you that much. Like the scale within the image. I like the clouds showing up within the image, kind of bringing forth. What do we got up here on the top? another person up there. So it definitely shows the full encapsulated through there. The light, the bright dark transitions are really good within there. The top left is the only part of the image I'm not completely crazy about. Possibly would crop that in a little bit. Can't crop it down too much. You lose that person on the top right, but you could crop that in maybe a little bit more or crop it down. I don't know. I'd play around with a little bit of that. There's just a fair amount of dead space on the top left.
That was by Carol Hageman. Coming in for a landing.
Great image. Really appreciate the timing on this one, the detail. I think it's within the thistle as well as a whole. Only change I would potentially make is I would darken the bottom, and I would just do a linear gradient kind of down through the bottom portion and take the exposure down. Not tons, as you can see within there, but I want you focused up here, not down here at all. So just by adjusting that, well, now I'm keeping the focus up onto the flower itself or the bee coming in to land.
That was by Pat Hutchinson. Daddy is kissing mommy.
That's kind of cute. I like it. Okay. So one of the techniques I demonstrated in the past, and I don't want to go through a lot of it, didn't make sense in panoramas, but this is the one I would show here is I would try to do a proximate radial over the top of my subject, something like this. And this is going to target just the actual flower itself. And then I would copy over here, duplicate and invert mask 2. So now I have another one that's completely outside of that. And the reason I do this is a couple reasons. So one, here's our top one. And what I'm going to do on the back side is I'm going to take that exposure down ever so slightly, not that much even, just like a quarter of a point. I'm going to cool off the temperature. I'm going to desaturate the back ever so slightly. And then I'm going to take away a little bit of clarity, take away a little texture, take away a little sharpness. And so now, possibly overdid it, possibly not. I'm not sure. Your personal determination. But now I could do on this one kind of a little bit of the opposite. And I'm going to go overboard just a hair so you can see the technique. So now I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to add some clarity. I'm going to add some texture. I'm going to add a little bit of sharpness. I'm going to ever so slightly brighten it up, ever so slightly warm it up very subtly within the image. And now, so there's our before. And here, I'll just get out of here. Actually, so you can see it better. There's our before and there's our after. And the effect's a little strong. I would go in and dial it back just ever so slightly. But now, rather than getting lost as much in the background within there, I'm showing those flowers. They're popping. They're coming out much, much more in terms of the subject. So anytime I have an intimate subject like this that I want to showcase, I'm going to use some variation of this technique. And you can fine tune it so it's very, very subtle and you can't even notice it. But you can now, that image is going to feel much more dimensional and pop out towards you.
That was by Philip Snyder. This is Desert Light.
No, this place, this is up behind there is Hunts Mesa. That's where I was. So there's something going on within the sky and the lighting back here that doesn't completely match for me. And then it looks like there's a little bit of white vignetting down here on the bottom, which doesn't quite match from what we're trying to go for. So as I can't completely pinpoint it, but I would start with bringing some of the brightness and kind of pulling back into the midtones like I've shown before. And I'm just not completely sure. It's like the lighting's not completely matching or the vignetting down here. If you want a vignette, unless you're going for an artistic effect, I never vignette the bright way. I always will vignette ever so slightly the dark way within the image. I think bright vignetting takes away within our images of what we're doing.
That was by Ed Hageman. Devil's Island Sea Caves.
Fun image, really unique. I like the detail. Once again, I potentially would watch my clipping. If we look over here on the right-hand side, we're clipping over quite a bit on our brights, just pushing those blues quite a bit. And so sometimes we can do that by warming up our white balance. We can bring that back. But I'm going to want to get that bright detail back a little bit. I'm going to back this off of the very, very cusp of the region. Probably also going to desaturate my blues ever so slightly on this one. Same technique, just come in and select that exact channel. I don't need to go that much. I'm going to pull out just a little bit of that blue because I want the greens and everything else to feel good. And then I'll open up my shadows within the cave, possibly. But I'll be careful in terms of watching, but I want to maybe see just a little less of the dark within there. So there's our before and our after. Now you can see some of the details there.
That was by Pat Davis. Ethereal Blooms.
So this is one I looked at ahead of time and I really like it. Just the variety of the flowers and what went into it. It just, I was like, what's missing for me to not take away from the concept of the ethereal? And that was for me shifting those tones over to the midtones. Just that one adjustment of pulling down and moving my darks and a little bit of my shadows into the image. It still feels ethereal to me. And maybe I would just be adjusting my midtones. I'm not adjusting my brights or whatever else. But now I can see some of the stranding a little bit more of the actual flowers themselves, and I can see a little bit more of the detail. So that's my only comment, is just shifting the entire tone curve a little bit back towards the mid-tone portion.
That was by Linda Schmiel. This is Evening River Lights.
Nice. I would crop down possibly because I think on the right, the big building on the right isn't adding to the image. And then if you didn't crop down, I also would clone out those couple little stars. They look like they're sensor hot pixels or whatever else. You got about 3 or 4 of them up there in the sky, and I would just take them out. You're either going to have a lot of stars or no stars at all.
That was by Kiri Gottlieb. Final Kick.
I don't know why this guy on the right-hand side, I was looking at him earlier, like, you shouldn't be closing your eye. You're not hitting the ball. I guess he maybe thinks it's coming to him. What a great capture moment within there. The expressions on the different team members are really, really great. I don't think I changed anything else about this image.
That was by Ling Whitworth. Goddess of the Hunt.
Interesting capture. What was I looking at with this image earlier? I don't think there was anything on this image. I was considering. It felt a little bright, but it is also really high toned in that regard. Good orientation around the subject, kind of keeping the framing correct within there. The angular lineup on here was good. You got the splaying out of the concrete at the bottom and everything else there. So I wouldn't change anything.
That was by Michael Orr. Golden Hour Grace.
This one looks like it's, I think I've seen a similar variation of this image before. I have to say the matting, I wouldn't matte. Well, I guess it's an iPhone. It tells me what it is. Wouldn't matte with this matte. It's taking away from the beauty of the image. So if you're going to do a matting around the outside, gray or black or white would be the choice I would make on the matte. It really takes away from the beauty of your image. So even if we just take out the matting of it and kind of pull back into the image, now we're going to get a little bit better sense of what we're working with. So iPhones, I'm actually have a couple iPhone images in my portfolio now that I will print and sell that I captured in RAW. So if you can capture in the future with the iPhone, that's all you got. Do it. Don't do it. So you're a little limited probably because it was captured as a JPEG. I'm definitely intrigued by what's going down here within the reflections and everything within there. I'm not sure what's to the left of this image, this tree. But if there isn't another tree or there's something else, I'd want to see in general a little bit more on the left-hand side of the tree and kind of the full shape of the canopy of the tree.
That was by Susan Van Manen. If one can, then two can.
Fun. Okay. Only comment I had on this one was the clipping. So you can see we got some bright clipping going on right there, and we're losing that detail. So as you post-processed the image or captured it, I would try to fix that before you move forward anything more within your image. So the highlights kind of save a little bit of it, but I would just be a little bit cognizant of that.
That was by John Schickler. Lisbon's Vasco da Gama Bridge.
Beautiful. Yeah, really interesting image. Encapsulates a scene. The kind of fading out and the curvature is really, really nice. You know, it feels endless in the way it goes all the way back through there. Captured at f/16, even though we didn't get the sunburst star effects on the light, it still feels good. Well processed. I like the little bit of the shimmering of the light. I like some of the way you have the estuary lines kind of leading in the distance. It's a nice image.
That was by Tony Johnson. Marmot Jr.
Oh God, watch your sandwiches around these guys. Look at those teeth. We saw a marmot one time in Canada the size of a golden retriever. It was absolutely massive, but that's either here nor there. So the technique I showed on the flower of highlighting the subject and then back and then getting them to pop and then kind of de-emphasizing the background is something I would consider putting in place on this image just to get a little more separation, but definitely a cute, fun image.
Terry Troxel. Moving toward the goal.
Yeah, these are the kind of images, if it's you that's getting photographed with your eyes closed right there, you're probably upset. But I like the movement, the encapsulation of the scene. Sharp capture, I mean, using a higher ISO, but the right shutter speed. So we don't see a lot of blurring within the image, even though it's at a higher ISO. So well done in that regard. And capturing how things are moving. Oftentimes in images like this, we'll see blurring of a person because the shutter speed's not fast enough, but I'm not seeing that there.
That was by Bill Whitworth. Old Rides.
So there's a guy that sells at one of the art fairs I go to that sells a lot of images like this. And I always admire, I don't see the world this way. And I've never been into this kind of photography, but I admire it. And I like it and what it conveys. And so I don't know if I have a ton to add besides the coloration of it is really good. I mean, I like the fact that you're keeping it so bright on things like the gas pump, but also subtly toning back the Studebaker and showing some of the rust and some of the details and everything else. As a whole, I like the image.
That was by Ted Jerkuta. Reaching towards sunshine.
Yeah, so focus on in this image, getting separation between the background and the foreground. And what I think's going on a little bit is we're pushing just a little bit on the brightness. We should be able to see a little bit more of the details there within the flowers themselves. As a whole, it's interesting. I like the capture time of them moving towards the sunshine. These are the kind of images as well that I would go away zoom. Hold on, I got to drag the zoom screen out of I would flip it as well in terms of the movement. We want to see, most of the time in our images, we want to see movement going from left to right. It's how our brain processes things. And so by flipping that, it's kind of showing, giving you a place to start on the bottom left and moving up towards the top right. And I would probably flip an image like this.
That was by Penny Haller. Richmond Cityscape.
So we did a series on abstracts this spring with Sandra Bartaccia, Charles Needle, Richard Martin, and Sarah Marino, and it was absolutely fantastic. And Charles Needle in particular talked a lot about really creative photography techniques as well. And so intentional camera movement and a lot of the stuff that goes on to it, he showed for how he does flowers. And it was great. Then I looked at this image and I thought, wow, I would have never thought to do this in a cityscape environment of a lens blur technique, and how well executed it really was. So whoever took it, I applaud you. I've judged plenty of photography contests over the years, seen lots of original and unoriginal images, and I've yet to see one ever like this. Perfectly done in a lot of regards. So really, really liked it.
That was Parks Roundtree. Riverside Rest.
I have a soft spot for dragonflies, love them. So I'd want to see more of the dragonfly in this case. So on this image, once again, I've gone back to it before, I would crop out a lot of the right, possibly cropping up a little bit from the bottom. You can still show a lot of the beauty of the flower itself, and bring us more into the world of the dragonfly versus is out there. And you can play around with your own cropping variation, but it's too nice of a scene in my mind to have a lot of that information, a lot of the stuff on the right. I want to have you focused in on the scene and the situation of the dragonfly. Possibly tone curve adjustments and kind of pulling that detail once again back towards the center part as best you can. But I like the image.
That was Rebecca Perry. Rustic Country.
Not taken in San Luis Obispo, I can tell you that. We're here on the Central Coast. So images like this one, I'm not sure what to say completely without having a dialogue with the photographer, but I'll have the dialogue with the photographer in a one-way setting right now. What are you looking to showcase? And how do you want to showcase that? And how do you want to work with the scene like this? And the reason I ask that is it can feel very chaotic. And maybe that's what you want to show and what you want to demonstrate, because we have a lot of lines going on within an image like this. A lot of angular lines, a lot of horizontal lines, a lot of vertical lines with the fence posts and everything else. And if we want to bring some type of order and establish some type of direction within an image like this, we need to be working to help the viewer make sense of it within there. So I would, if I'm photographing a scene or a situation like this, I'm going to try to find a way to bring the viewer in versus making them feel like they can't find an order of what's going on. And so I'm going to use a leading line. I'm going to use an orientation. I'm going to use some type of framing. I'm going to do something to help the viewer focus in on what they want them to look at. And so these are the kind of images that I'd be photographing most of the time in wide angle. I'd be shooting this and I'd be using this pile of straw or grass or whatever in the foreground almost as an entry point. And I'd be distorting that with a wide angle lens to then kind of lead into the other portions of the image as a personal technique within there. Is the image a bad image? No. I just don't know exactly where or how to engage with the image from my perspective.
That was by Carol Annis. Separated at Birth.
What a great title. What an interesting capture too. I like the mood that's within this image and what it's evoking. Personal preference, I'm not a fan of the double frame, or the double kind of matte on the outside of two colors. And I don't think an image like this really needs it to stand out and really be distinctive. My biggest thing, which I've talked about in a lot of times, is just really thinking about the framing and the orientation and the cropping of it and what and how it reads. The choice right now is not a wrong choice. It feels like there's a fair amount of sky, which you do want to make it feel like the tree could grow up into that, but just kind of keeping the intent in mind.
That was Venkat Santosh. Silhouette of Serenity.
Encapsulates a scene was out there within the environment we go to. Probably you can see right here where I'm going to go to, we're getting clipping up there. The colors don't completely feel natural. I don't know if this was HDR treated to kind of bring things out, but what we have is the brightness here and then this band of dark and then some of the other things. And so it feels a little bit kind of blotchy versus more uniform. And so I would consider, as I'm processing this image, making less aggressive adjustments and more subtle so it feels very kind of uniform within the image.
That was by Jerry Posano. Storm moving in.
I like it. Looks like the Faroe Islands. I like what's going on. Hold on. Sorry, my wife accidentally turned the music on in my office. Oh, she got it right. I like what is being encapsulated here, some of the shore, with the storms coming in, the color of the boat, the color of the tin house or the roof on the tin house. Trying to figure out the background of the mountains and if there's anything I would consider doing differently. And I think the answer is probably no. If you had photographed this one as well in a wide angle, in a vertical orientation, it'd be something to consider. So I try to get into practice, and I'm not always best at it, of photographing in both angles when I'm out within there, because sometimes I'll like it a little bit different. And the clouds up there have a potential of, when you're shooting with a wide angle, you can see more of the clouds and kind of how they fixate. So just something, it reads differently, obviously, in a portrait versus a landscape orientation. No right or wrong, but just something to consider.
That was by Ann Fulcher. Sunrise on the Matterhorn.
I'm hoping to get there next summer. Beautiful. Love it. Did notice this one had a fair amount of noise within there. If you ran this one through Topaz or even through the denoise program, I think you could pull out a lot of that noise and bring back some of the detail within the image.
That was Wiley Wanvier. Sunset on the Chesapeake Bay.
Probably not an easy image to capture, I'm guessing. And I like what's going on. As I process this image, I would relook at my white balance a little bit. And I don't think I've shown this technique today, and I usually show it quite a bit. So the way I set my white balance, and it's going to look really bad on an already processed JPEG, but I do it on my RAWs, is I'm going, oops, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do this. I take my vibrance and saturation to 100, and I'm nuclearizing the image. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and I'm going to adjust my temperature to the point where the areas that are not getting direct light are going to start to feel cool. So when we adjust our images in Photoshop or Lightroom, we don't want our white balance to be completely uniform. We want to have the areas that are getting direct light to feel warm. So if we're looking up here in the clouds as an example, I don't want that to feel like this. I want it to feel closer to this, so I'm getting some separation. And then we can also adjust our tint ever so slightly based on what we're seeing there. And then I'll take it back to our kind of normal level within there. So there's our before and there's our after. And now we're getting better separation within the clouds and less color bleed. We can still go in and add some saturation and make some adjustments, but now we're going to have much better separation up there within the clouds.
That was by Heidi Nunnally. That's crazy.
Oh, is that the title too? Yeah, exactly.
That's it. Yep.
That's it. It's a double. Great. Don't know what I would change. I think it's you put yourself in the right place to show the scale of how the person's up there. You did a good job leaving space at the top. I mean, one of the biggest issues we could run into that you could see in images is something like this, because then you're going to feel very compressed. Like, oh my God, is he going to hit the corner or whatever else? So you did a good job of leaving plenty of space around the image, around the individual. So you can see it's almost perfectly centered, which is the right choice in my opinion as well.
That was by Michael Bryant. The end.
Well, I wasn't sure if this was supposed to be the absolute last picture and I figured out later, I think it was literally a composite all the way through. So, creative, interesting. I like the cropping around everything within the image. Probably put some thought into the orientation of how you wanted the flow to go, which is kind of fun as well. So yeah, this is a part of why we can photograph, is finding creative ways to demonstrate different things in different parts of nature.
That was by Karen Davis. The Maple Forest.
So this is a good choice to go black and white because the sky is really difficult to photograph in an image like this and have it look good in color. So anytime we're getting that white sky in the background, it's going to clip, it's going to blow out. It's really hard when we're doing color. So black and white is a good choice. Even with the black and white, you can see we still have some hot pixels that I probably would try to tone back a little bit. But I like the orientation. I like the way it kind of brings up into the trees. You got some of the wide varieties within there. So well done.
That was Patricia Munford. Tranquil Teal.
Great. Feels like the duck could go right back underneath it. Looking at the image, you can see it's not clipping. What you already have is the darks, or the right job on the darks. It's a very interesting image. Very well captured, whether it was by the choice. I think there's some blurring of the back by the person in the post-processing. Well done. You want to de-emphasize everything other than the subject themselves. I like that we still have some detail over here within the tree. This is an engaging image and it's very well executed.
That was by Cindy Walker. Walking on Water.
Well done as well. Good details within the image. Good detail sharpness within the image. We can still see some of the feathers that are going on within there. This one is actually better, in my opinion, to keep some of the detail here in the foreground. So you can see that it's walking forward and it's walking onto something interesting on top of it versus blurred out. Left to right movement, which is good. Didn't crop over on the left-hand side. So it has the interesting kind of part of the foot extending out there. Good job.
That was by Harold Lana.
I think this is our last one.
And this is the last one, Whispering Secrets in Silence.
Interesting choice of the black and white on it. Makes a lot of sense to make. Also good orientation. Probably maybe not intentional, maybe is, of the vertical lines or the horizontal lines within the building behind. The strong lines within the structures, the lines of the sidewalk as well. All those things add up into an interesting image. So good job.
That was by Marianne Barnhart.
All right. Well, we got through them all.
Yay.
Other questions, or any other questions or things I said that weren't clear, or things you want to disagree with, which you totally can, or
I felt a lot
was
better.
wondering, that photograph with the pile of straw and the hut on top, what would that happen? What would that do to that if you flipped it?
I'm not sure. Definitely
That's
something to consider. It would read a little differently.
To the right.
Yeah. Yeah, those are the ones to kind of play around with. And those are also the scenes and situations to take multiple images of. We had the beauty of digital is if we get into a scene that we don't know what we're being drawn to, but we know we're being drawn to something. Those are the ones oftentimes I'll spend more time photographing from a wide variety of things, angles, perspectives, focal lengths, orientations of the cameras, and then later when I go back through them, sometimes I'll find, okay, I was drawn to this element and this type of image is going to showcase that better than this type. Well, good. Glad we got some demonstration things, outstanding evaluation. Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Nice suggestions there. Okay. Yeah, I try to be as helpful. Thank you for that one, Carol. Like some of these things, we don't always get it the way we want it. And also I have my own biases within my photography. So don't take everything I say as the gospel. Like, well, Nic said this and about this image, my image or blah, blah, blah. It's my perspective and I'm trying to help you to understand intent and what you want to do going forward. So that's my biggest goal within this work is to help you on yours, which is good.
It helps a lot that you're able to highlight certain things and compare.
Yeah.
And show
Yeah,
how
exactly. So
Well, Nic,
well, good.
thanks
Well, for
very
those of
much.
you that are-
This has
Go ahead.
been extremely valuable for the group, and you showed some techniques that we've not really seen before. Some of the manipulation of like the white balance trick. That's certainly different for us.
well, good. Well,
as-
I can't believe I got all the way to the end before I showed that one. So
no,
guess I'm getting rusty. No, not too bad.
no. It's the critiques were very helpful, and we're very grateful for your participation.
Well, good. Well, last thing I'll say, and then I'm going to go get going on some dinner, is the Black and White Speaker Series, which starts the end of the month, is going to have two of the speakers are going to be doing post-processing demonstrations of their techniques live, and then two of them are going to be doing image evaluations of images that are submitted. So regardless of where you are in black and white or if you have interest, it's going to be a phenomenal series. The one we did last summer, people just ranted and raved about and continue to. And this one I think is going to be equally as good, if not better. So I'd love to see you join us for that one.
I'm sure Karen will put that out in the newsletter, and
I know Karen treats me well, so
which is a good thing because
which is good.
writing it down, and I'm sure it'll wind up on another piece of paper.
Good, very well. So
that was our president speaking to you. I know you couldn't see him because they have the lights still off in there.
oh, okay.
That little tiny itsy bitsy screen, that's what's broadcasting all of us and you
Oh, good.
in the church. So I think their lights are starting to go on. So that was Martin who was saying thank you. And Karen, I don't know where she is at the moment. I know she's on there somewhere, but she's probably saying goodbye to people and moving things around. So
Perfect.
it's 9 o'clock here.
I'm here.
And there's Karen.
Thank you. Yep, it'll go in the newsletter. So
Okay.
guys,
Great.
look for information about Nic's upcoming events. All right. Thanks everyone.
Sounds great. Well,
Okay.
thanks for having me. Glad to be back. See you again next year.
Glad that
Thank
you're here.
you.
If you'll have me back, you don't have to. So,
You will definitely be back.
all right.
All
Thanks so
right.
much, all. Take care out there.
Bye-bye.